Right now, I may only be saying hello to my writers, but in only a few short weeks, I'm going to be able to call all of you authors, and I can't wait for it. So let's get started so we can turn writer into author. Let's start by figuring out what the heck your story is going to be about. Now, a few weeks ago, I did ask you a couple ideas that you may already have percolating in that wonderful mind of yours, and you guys had some really neat experiences and stories that you already are thinking of drawing from. So when you think of something to write about, the most authentic stories are those that we've personally lived through or have firsthand experiences with. So for me, that could be talking about growing up in a rural community, or I could talk about experiences with a thyroid disorder. These are things that I've personally experienced and therefore have an authentic voice to tell. Now, another idea would be the experience of someone close to you. For example, I could tell about the story of almost losing my brother, and maybe how that can be really scary, especially if you're a young child. I could also tell the story of something like my best friend having to go through the experience of being a child growing up in a home with an alcoholic father. Now, of course, I would have to change a lot of the outright details in order to make it student appropriate, but because it's someone that's very close to me and I have that personal contact with, it might become a very authentic story. Maybe you're going to choose to retell a true story after completing research about it. For example, maybe go back into history and think about something that happened during the years or the era of segregation, of internment camps, and being able to create a true or a very authentic story based on true facts. Or even inventing a story completely a work of fiction that's not set in history, but again, doing ample research to be able to make sure that it's as authentic as possible. So once you have a couple ideas brainstormed, then go ahead and start thinking about the next step, the main characters. But a great way to think through this story idea is to literally sit down and brainstorm 10, 15, 20 ideas and then start talking with people that are close to you. What do you think would make a good story? What is a book that doesn't already exist? Do some research. See if there are already books about being gluten-free, about having a peanut allergy. If they don't already exist on the market, or there aren't many good pieces of literature on the market, it could be a good one. All right, let's talk characters. So having one clear main character is probably the easiest way to go, especially for such a short book and for having to do all the illustrations yourself. But you could definitely have more than one main character should you so choose. But getting to know that character and really thinking about him or her, because we are going to have a human character for this book, that can be really helpful. Because even if things like the socioeconomic status or their abilities or their religion never come into play within the storyline or plot, it does help you visualize the complete character. So if there is a scene where they have to interact with other people, you have a better understanding of what is motivating that child or character and how they would interact in that situation. So sit down and really sketch out not just their gender, but also their age. What grade are they in school if they're school age? Their race, their family, their socioeconomic status, their religion, their abilities. And then start sketching out even physical pictures of what you think this character might look like. We will talk more about illustrations later, but it's nice to have an idea in mind. Even if you're not the best artist, it's okay. Just get some ideas down. Next question is going to be that of setting. What is the time period that this book is going to take place in? Is it going to be in the past, the present, or maybe even the future? Think also about the country. If you haven't had a lot of experiences in other countries, it may not be a good idea to go outside of America for the setting. Also think about the state. We know that there's such a rich variety between the states within the United States. So choose a state and even a city that you're familiar with, one that you've lived in, visited, or know a lot about. Also start thinking about the neighborhood in which this setting is going to take place. To get your inspiration, for example, if I were setting a story in the Liberty area, so in northern Kansas City, I might even go and tour Liberty, take some pictures, look up pictures on the internet to look at what the normal houses, neighborhoods, what businesses my character might be able to go to. That way, when I sit down to sketch out or think about the setting for the background, everything would be very authentic. Or maybe this isn't going to take place in a specific city or state. Maybe it's going to take place in a specific place itself, like a school, a home, or everything might take place in a doctor's office. Well, then start thinking about what that setting might look like as well. How can you make it authentic? How can you make it look realistic? Looking up pictures, visiting places, going back into your memory from the experience if it's drawn from personal experience, and writing down all the details you can to make a very accurate depiction of your setting. Haha, now that we have the big ideas of who is in your book, where they are, and what is in general going to happen, now we get to start thinking about the plot itself. Now, way back in high school, in your English classes, you talked about the different types of conflict that exist in novels and plays and dramas and stories. It's always a character versus something else. So, conflict can be between character and him or herself. For example, in the book I Love My Hair, this girl struggles with the idea of her hair looking very different than other people's. And it's not until she learns a little bit more about the history and the culture surrounding the hair that she's able to come to grips with the fact that she loves her very unique hair. So if your character is having self-doubt, anxiety, or is struggling, then they might have a conflict versus themselves. Another conflict is one character pitted against another character, even if it's only in a fun and playful way. For example, in the book Tiger in My Soup, there is a boy that is left alone with his older sister, and she, in his imagination, is trying to kill him because as she makes a soup, she lets a tiger into the house. It's a pretty fun and delightful and imaginative story, but in it, he's envisioning his sister as a tiger that is battling and in conflict with him. So, fun and lighthearted, but there's still that conflict of character versus character. Or maybe it's going to be character versus society. For example, in the book White Socks Only, a little girl in the segregated South misinterprets a whites only sign, thinking it meant only people with white socks. So when she goes to drink out of the White Socks Only fountain, she has a lot of conflict with the society and the neighborhood surrounding her because she's going up against what society believes is right and just. Another idea is going against nature. Now, I'll admit, I imagine something like Castaway, where it's somebody trying to survive against nature at its worst, but it can also be much simpler, such as maybe a gluten allergy. That's a naturally occurring reality for those who suffer from allergies to gluten or from celiac disease. So it could be a book about somebody having to deal with human nature and their own physical abilities. Now, there is this other category of character versus fate. For example, Harry Potter is a great example of this because he's going against this, I don't know, what would you call it, like the thing, you know, the Hall of Records with the orb that tells the prophecy. That would be character versus fate, because there is this fate or a destiny that they are bound to fulfill. Star Wars would be another example of it. Yeah, I don't think we're going to turn this into a major 7-book series, so for now, I think we can leave fate as one that we're not going to choose in terms of our conflict. Alright, so you have your character, you have your setting, you have the major idea of the event that you're going to depict in the book, and now you even know your conflict. So if you're ready, you could sit down and start sketching out your plot map. Again, this should look familiar. You probably saw it for the very first time when you were in middle school, and then into your junior high and high school years as well. The plot map helps you to figure out how events are supposed to happen or be plotted out. So you'll remember that exposition is the very beginning of the story. In children's books, it usually takes about 1 to 3 pages, and it introduces the reader to the main character, the setting, and any other relevant background information we need to know. Rising action is when we are introduced to the conflict and we see it taking root. This usually takes up the bulk of the book, usually anywhere from 4 to 16 pages in a children's picture book. Now, after several events in the rising action, we get to the climax. This is where the two elements of the conflict meet head to head. So this is where the little girl needs to decide, is she going to accept herself and her hair that looks different than everyone else's or not? Is this little boy and his older sister going to get along while their parents are away or not? Is this little girl going up against society going to be justified for drinking from the water fountain or not? Is this little boy who's living with a gluten allergy going to be able to eat and be okay with this and manage it successfully on his own or not? So this usually happens about 2/3 of the way through the book. After the climax, there's then following action. So what are all the events that happen after the problem has been addressed? So how's that problem finally solved and ultimately resolved, which leads to the resolution. So in children's books especially, this can end with a resolution that is a happy ending. Or if there's no happy ending, maybe it just ends in a place where that particular problem is solved. All right, so you have a couple ideas to work through as you start thinking about your own children's book. Next week, we'll talk more specifically about how to create a storyboard, how to write a story, and I'm sure the part that you're most excited about, you're probably most dreading, the illustrations. That way you can start work on all three of those elements. Also next week, I'm going to be asking for a modified version of your plot map, so I know that you're already thinking through your story and have a solid idea I can give feedback on. All right, writers, I'm excited to see you become authors.